A turbocharger uses the energy in an engine's exhaust gases to produce compressed air, which it feeds back into the engine. By doing this, it plays a big part in enhancing the engine's performance and reliability. MET turbochargers were developed and are produced by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. With high reliability and efficiency, they are used on engines around the world. A MET turbocharger incorporates a silencer, a scroll, a gas casing, and a pedestal. On the inside, it has high-speed rotating components such as a turbine rotor, turbine blades, and a compressor impeller. Maintaining high turbocharger performance at all times is vital to ensure high engine performance and reliability. This means it's essential to understand the structure of the turbocharger and to apply this knowledge in turbocharger maintenance. In this video, you'll see how a MET83SE turbocharger is disassembled, inspected, and reassembled. The internal parts of the turbocharger must be cleaned and inspected periodically, depending on the combustion condition, operating hours, and other attributes of the engine. First, disconnect the turbocharger side wiring from the tachometer cable's terminal box. Then, connect a hoist to the silencer using a cable and remove the retaining nuts. When removing the silencer, make sure it does not come in contact with the tachometer cable's protective pipe. Place the removed silencer in a safe location. Use rope or some other means to secure it so it doesn't tip or fall over. Before removing the air inlet guide, use a clearance gauge to measure the clearance between the air inlet guide and the impeller at 4 locations: top, bottom, left, and right. These data will be necessary during reassembly. Remove the hex bolt from the inner scroll using the hex key. Attach the slinging device to the inner scroll. Make sure the slinging device and scroll are in tight contact with each other. Do not use bolts that are longer than the T16 bolts. Using bolts that are too long could cause the flange to split. Next, screw the 2 lifting screws into the holes on the left and right of the flange. When you do this, screw the lifting screws carefully so that they are the same depth on the left and right, and pull out the inner scroll. Lift slowly using a cable. Stop lifting when the cable is under tension. Gradually pull out the inner scroll and remove it. The clearance between the inner scroll and the impeller is small, so be careful not to let the impeller come into contact with the inner scroll. There is a diffuser attached to the inner scroll. When storing the inner scroll, secure it so it doesn't tip or roll, and be careful not to damage the diffuser. If there is a heat-resistant lagging on the mounting flange, you will need to remove the lagging. Attach the slinging device to the gas inlet inner casing using the bolts. Remove the nuts from the mounting flange on the gas inlet inner casing. Screw the lifting screws into the holes on the left and right of the flange. When you do that, be careful to screw the lifting screws to the same depth. Lift slowly using a cable. Stop lifting when the cable is under tension. You'll now be able to pull out the casing. There's a nozzle attached to this gas inlet inner casing. Secure the casing in a safe place. Use a clearance gauge to measure the clearance between the gas outlet guide and the tips of the turbine blades at 4 locations: top, bottom, left, and right. These data will be needed for comparison during reassembly. Now measure the thrust clearance. If the thrust bearing is full of lubricating oil, you will not be able to take an accurate measurement, so give the rotor shaft at least 10 turns. Set the dial gauge on the end of the rotor shaft. The thrust clearance is the difference between the shaft deflection when the shaft is pushed and the shaft deflection when the shaft is pulled between the compressor side and the turbine side. Take at least 5 measurements and check that the values do not vary. Remove the cap and fastening bolt from the end of the impeller. Measure the distance from the end of the rotor shaft to the surface of the nut. You'll need this dimensional value for checking that the amount of tightening is correct after reassembly. Next, attach the dial gauge to the end of the rotor shaft. As you manually turn the rotor clockwise, use the dial gauge to measure the deflection of the rotor shaft. These data will be needed for comparison during reassembly. Attach the stay. By preventing the rotor from falling out, the stay will serve as a support to enable safe removal of the rotor. Before anything else, Use a brush or compressed air to clean out the threaded hole in the end of the rotor shaft. Screw in the rotor pulling out tube. On the gas inlet outer casing, mount the stay with the roller support assembled on it. After making sure the ram of the hydraulic jack is tight, screw the hydraulic jack into the end of the shaft. While doing this, hold the jack securely with your hands to prevent it from falling and damaging the impeller. When you have screwed the jack in fully, give it one reverse turn. Place the hydraulic pump with the hose connected to it on a flat surface. Raise the pressure of the hydraulic pump to the specified level. For the MET83SE turbocharger, the specified pressure is 65.7 megapascals. Insert the rod through the slot in the hydraulic jack into the hole in the shaft nut. Using the rod, turn the shaft nut counterclockwise to loosen it. If the nut does not loosen, reduce the pressure to 0, then raise the pressure to 120% of the specified level and try to loosen the nut again. If the engine has just been stopped and the impeller is still hot, the thermal expansion of the impeller will make it impossible to loosen the nut at the specified pressure. Reduce the hydraulic pump pressure by opening the relief valve. Carefully remove the jack from the shaft. Remove the impeller's retaining nut. Screw the protection bolt into the end of the rotor shaft. Attach the impeller removal fittings to the boss of the impeller using a bolt. Slowly turn the handle with the other hand to pull out the impeller. Now remove the handle. Screw the slinging device to the impeller drawout tube using the handle. Change the position of the shackle on the slinging device. Lift slowly using a cable. Once the impeller is separated from the rotor shaft, support its weight and set it down horizontally, taking care not to damage it. Do not forget to remove the protective bolt from the rotor shaft. Use the threaded bar on the threaded part in the sleeve and pull out the sleeve. Remove the support retaining bolts and attach the guide bar. Screw the lifting bolt into the threaded hole in the flange part of the support. Then lift the support and remove it. The compressor side oil labyrinth and thrust bearing are attached to the support. When storing the support, place it with the thrust bearing metal side uppermost. With the support removed, you'll be able to see the thrust collar. Remove the thrust collar slowly and carefully using the threaded bar. Screw the rotor guide pipe into the rotor shaft. Attach the support to the compressor end of the bearing pedestal. Make sure the support is free of damage, burrs, and dirt. On the stay that was attached earlier, use the lifting screws to adjust the height of the roller so as to slightly raise the rotor shaft from the bearing. Pull the rotor shaft pulling out tube so as to pull out the rotor shaft as far as the stay that was attached a little while ago. Put the cable around the large diameter part of the disc end of the rotor. Remove the stay and completely take out the rotor. When you store the rotor shaft with the pulling out tube removed, take steps to prevent the turbine blades from touching the floor. Remove the retaining bolts from the gas labyrinth. Screw the removed bolts into the threaded holes and remove the gas labyrinth while lifting. Next is removal of the turbine side oil labyrinth. Fasten the support, using the bolt, to the oil labyrinth. After fastening and after lifting the oil labyrinth using the bolt, remove the support and the oil labyrinth. Remove the turbine side journal bearing. For the turbine side thrust bearing, use the hex key to remove the hex bolt. Then remove the turbine side thrust bearing by hand. Be careful not to drop the bolt. Remove the compressor side journal bearing using the threaded bar. Disassembly of the MET83SE turbocharger is now complete. Store all the removed parts in a safe place and keep them clean. The turbocharger's performance can deteriorate if its components become worn and dirty during use. To prevent performance from deteriorating in this way, regular inspection of components is essential. Now remove the compressor bearing and oil labyrinth from the support. Use a hex key to remove the thrust bearing side hex bolts. Screw the same bolt into the threaded hole in the compressor side thrust bearings to lift the bearings. Then remove the bearings. Turn over the support and pull off the compressor side oil labyrinth. If a thrust bearing becomes worn, the tapered part gets smaller, and the ratio of the flat part to the tapered part gets bigger. To check the extent of wear, first put a thin, even layer of red ink on the thrust collar. Gently place the colored side of the thrust collar on the metal surface of the bearing. Gently turn the thrust collar in the direction of rotation. Then, lift off the thrust collar and observe where red ink has been transferred to the bearing. If the red ink shows that the ratio of the length of the tapered land to the length of the flat land is from 4:1 to 2:1 on the compressor side and from 2:1 to 1:1 on the turbine side, replace the thrust bearing with a new one. For details of standards that may or may not be used when judging tapered land comparison, please check the instruction manual. If you have difficulty making an evaluation, it is advisable to replace the thrust bearing with a new one. If the metal surface of the bearing is deeply scratched, has multiple scratches, has surface separation, or is cracked, replace the thrust bearing with a new one. Please inspect the turbine side thrust bearing in the same way.